Welcome to Digital After Dark with your hosts, Matt and Andrew.
Hello, and welcome back to Digital After Dark. This is episode 17. I'm one of your hosts, Andrew, joined, as always, by Matt.
Hello. It's good to be back.
So this is definitely going to be a little bit more informal. No PowerPoint. It's just going to be two folks just talking about 5 things that made us change our ways of working the most during our career. Now, if I remember, I believe this is the topic that you came up with, Matt.
Mute. Yes, did. I think we have a list of potential topics, and I think there were a couple of ones where, well, I think it was in your list, wasn't it? And then, but it resonated with me. It was something I've been thinking about, and it's quite a nice one to do because it leads on to, I think, some of the things that have changed in our career over the kind of 15 years that we've both been in the industry. Will lead nicely on to follow-on topics because some of it is fairly recent, as you might imagine.
I'm sure that a lot of people can guess one of the things that changed the most. But we both have been in the industry now, what is it now? Over 15 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can still remember it being amateur then before Adobe Analytics. So, I don't know how we want to start with this. If you want me to go first and then you, and we just do one after another.
Yeah, go for it. Go on, you go first, and then I'll chip in if things resonate.
Sure. So I'm going to try to do this in sequential order from my very early days to the most recent. So, and the first thing that really got to me was thinking about my time at Sky. When I first joined, it was really much about being a digital developer, and it was actually writing the code and then either giving it to the developers, or they would go ahead and give me direct access to the site and publish it myself. So I would talk with the stakeholders, they would give me the requirements, I implement the requirements, it goes live. About a year and a half into this, they decided that they wanted to change this. And it was more from a security point of view, which I rightly understand because I'm not a developer. And they said, you know what? I want you to be more like a product owner. So you get the requirements, you tell us what it actually means, we implement it, we sit together, we test it together, and then we release. And I really do miss those days of being able to go up to their desk, sit there, and pair up. And I understand why they do the pairing up because there are things I caught that they may not have, or things that they catch that I never even thought about. So it was
Was this when you were writing the code and you would then go and pair it with them, or was this when you moved to be more like a product manager?
so whenever I was writing the code, there was no pairing up. I would literally just, for one of them, it was the help site. I actually had access directly to the help site, the publishing rights and everything to write the code, publish it, and it was live with no one else vetting it.
And how, when you say writing the code, because was this relatively early in your tagging career? What
Yeah.
sort of code, like given the complexity of the code you can write now, how do you feel it compares?
I was very basic. It was stop prop 13 equals to some dynamic variable, and that dynamic variable would get pulled somewhere else from the site.
So you were scraping it from other places, or the development team were preparing it for you, and then you were pulling it from a location and mapping it.
Sometimes they'll do that. Sometimes I wrote it myself. But this is back in 2010, so as you can imagine, nothing too complex.
And then, so then they changed to more of a product manager kind of role, because I started in a very similar place. So I got into digital analytics because I was the content manager. So I managed the CMS. So I was writing HTML essentially and dropping content onto a website for a company called TD Waterhouse Stockbrokers. Yeah, it was very, very similar. It was like, oh, you do the web content, you control the content management system. So there wasn't really developers as such. We had an agency who like configured the CMS, and then we would go in within the confines of the CMS and update the HTML directly. And it was like, oh yeah, you're that guy that does the content management. So can you implement the analytics platform for us? In this case, it was GA prior to GTM. So it was, yeah, it wasn't Urchin. No, I definitely wasn't Urchin. It was definitely GA by that point, Universal Analytics. And then, so then that changed from you having direct access to the platform to you then becoming like a product manager. And so how did that work then? What was that like?
It was more of what I would call a traditional data analyst now, where you get the requirements, you write up what is expected from it, what is the use case, and then you give it to the developers. They write the code, and then once they get done writing the code, hand it back to us to test, validate, make sure it's working correctly before releasing.
I mean, that's the case today for sites with a data layer, for example, but there's still a lot of code writing in tag management platforms, which is, I guess, the middle ground where you have direct access to deploy to the website, but within very limited scope.
It is true, but we still start off with this is the documentation and validation beforehand.
Yeah, because you want, for the most part, particularly with a well managed platform and digital analytics setup, you want for most of your data to be coming from the data layer. You don't want to be writing code on the fly.
Exactly. We'll never get to a point where I think we'll have no code, but I believe that we should have minimal code
In the TMS.
in the TMS.
Yes.
So that was probably my very first real big change in how it was, because it was interesting going from writing a lot of code to now I'm writing more documentation.
Which I think is a good practice to get into,
Yep.
understand, because it forces you to understand the requirements. And then when you're taking those requirements and handing them to somebody else, they've got to be able to interpret and understand those requirements. And I think as a practice, it forces you to understand what you're actually being asked to do, rather than just, going in and grabbing the data. It forces you to comprehend it in a way, because for you to be able to explain it to somebody else, you've got to understand it more fundamentally.
Of course. So that's my first one.
So I think it leads quite nicely into my first major change that I made, and it's similar and dissimilar. It's almost like a direct follow-on. So as I said, I started out in the content management system, and then just putting the GA code snippet in, basically, and then performing. I was doing more of the analysis back then rather than the implementation. It was, you do the implementation, you do the analysis, but the implementation is basically the code snippet and the header. And then I moved on to another company, another bit within the financial sector, a loans company. And I was much more like a product manager. It was, we had, it was dynamic tag manager at the time. It wasn't launch. We had dynamic tag manager, but I was defining requirements and passing them to development teams, and then they were implementing those requirements in terms of like a data layer. And then I was sitting on top of the data layer, so I was wanting them to have data available, and then for me to be able to collect it. And I was finding, this is all context, by the way, but I was finding that they were misinterpreting what I was asking them to do. And it comes back to that thing of, you have to have the ability not only to understand what you want and what the business wants, and to understand the use cases and why you're doing something in order to explain it to somebody else, but you also have to have the right language to explain it. And developers, or certainly the developers I was speaking to at this company, which was Provident, were they're not, whatever it was I was doing to explain, I wasn't explaining it in the right way. So I decided that the best thing for me to do would be to learn JavaScript. because then I would be able to talk about things. I wouldn't have to sort of vaguely explain things in layman's terms. I could just say, I want you to do this. I want you to run this piece of JavaScript to generate the data that I want. And so I did. I did an online course, which I don't know if you remember. Do you remember Code Academy? Where essentially it would gamify it, and you could, I think it's still around. I don't know if it's paid now, but at the time it was free. Or freemium, I think it was. It was, you did a certain amount and then you had to pay it back. It might have been completely free at the time. But I followed through on a number of those courses, and it was stuff like, create the game rock paper scissors using JavaScript, that kind of thing, which I still quite enjoy doing. So one of my little nephews is at that age at school where they're starting to do code, and so we were just round at like the in-laws, and he came over and was talking to me about doing code. I was like, oh, let's go and build rock paper scissors. So we did. So I can still remember it. We went and built rock paper scissors on his grandpa's computer. I've lost my train of thought, but yes, the point being is that was, I think, a seismic shift in the way that I appreciated and thought about digital analytics, and I've always since thought about development teams. I think you get one, it meant that I could talk to them in a language that they understood, and I wasn't having to constantly try to reframe things and translate things. I could just ask for things in the way that I wanted them to deliver them. So that was a huge help, but it also made me appreciate them a lot more, and it's an attitude that I've possibly held in the past, which was, why are the developers blocking me? Like, why don't they understand what I'm asking them to do? They're trying, and that feeling of that adversarial feeling. And then as soon as I could talk to them and translate my requirements into the language that they could understand, and try to make their lives easy for them, I came to appreciate their role, their responsibility a lot more, and understand where they were coming from. And essentially it was, this isn't the main part of my job. This is your job. This is the main part of your job, being me. This is the main part of your job, but I have to do 500 other things. I have to make sure that the website uptime is at 99%, and I have to make sure the back-end systems are working, and I have to make sure that the front end's working, and I have to make sure that the website looks right, and I have to protect the brand and the image and so on. And so you're asking me for this thing, and I'm not being obtuse and I'm not being obstructive. And as soon as I found a way to explain it in a way that they easily understood, it just made that so they weren't trying to obstruct me. It was just, I hadn't taken the time to get to know them and to get to know what their pressures were and to see things from their point of view. And then learning the JavaScript was the starting point to that. And it was a much, much better relationship, and we got much better data quality. So it's interesting. Sorry, I will shut up because I know you can see you trying to talk. But it's interesting how much of technical things like this, like technical implementations, technical roles, are actually about the relationship building and understanding the different people that you need to complete those roles. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's almost like having empathy. Don't judge someone until you can walk in their shoes. So
Totally.
no, it makes sense, and I completely agree with the fact that they're not being a blocker. They are very conscious over the fact of how much pressure the company will have on this website, where they need to think about security and the content that's down there, and how is it loading, and how will the different type of technologies are connecting to it. Like, I still remember that one of the developers back then talked about how about 25% of his working time was spent to making sure that things still worked on IE6.
Yeah, incredible. And I think that's the thing, is just understanding that, when people are in the role like ours, understanding that data quality and data collection is 1% of their responsibility. If it's that, you're essentially asking them to do something that isn't really within their remit, and they don't really get credit for. I've seen so many, we've had this conversation, I'm sure, on other podcasts, but I've seen so many companies where leadership professes that data quality is important, yet development teams are benchmarked on speed of delivery, only on speed of delivery. and not on data quality. It's like, well, you're going to get degraded data quality. And if I ask them to focus on data quality, they'll get punished because your KPIs are wrong. So yeah, I think finding, and I've said it many times in many talks, finding a way to make your development team's life easy is key. And the very first step of doing that was me taking a step back and thinking, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe the reason that they don't understand me is because I'm not explaining it properly. What can I do to try to understand them better and then that whole journey kind of fell on from that one decision.
And that's very mature of you to even think about that, because not everyone will stop to think, well, maybe it's me.
I've got a long history of being the problem. It comes naturally to me.
So that's the first ones. And it's interesting because you automatically started talking about tag management already. And just out of curiosity, when it was DTM, was this Adobe DTM or was this Search Discovery DTM?
It was Adobe DTM, so it was this was 2013, something like that, 2014. So it had gone from, it was direct implementation via the CMS at the previous company, and then this was Adobe DTM.
Yeah. So actually, that had to be a little bit later, I think, because it was originally Search Discovery, and then Adobe bought them out to bring it on to become DTM.
It must have already happened. It must have, because I remember it being branded and I was accessing it through, maybe it only just happened, but I remember it being branded and I was accessing through the not Experience Cloud. It wasn't called that at the time. What was it called? Basically the same portal you accessed analytics. You didn't. Oh no, God, no. I think maybe you did have separate logins at the time. I think you did
I
have.
think you amazing.
Yeah, God, what
Yeah,
the pain we have to deal with.
I know. Now the single log on and you can switch between companies.
I think no, it can't have still been Search Discovery at that time. We'll have to do a
Well,
Google and find out when it switched.
well, the reason I brought that up is my next one is around data layers. And it was my first real thought of we really need to move to a data layer model at Sky. And I remember going out and really looking at all of these different vendors, getting them in, doing the what I thought was the right thing, and getting the developers involved to look at it, make sure that they're happy with this decision. And after it was all said and done, we narrowed it down to either Search Discovery or Telium. And at the end, I will always remember this because I had to write back to Helium verbatim to what the developer said, and they literally wrote back saying, "We have no words to say back." The developers at Sky very much believe that they create technology and they happen to build a website at the same time. So after looking at everything, they said, "You know what? Helium is by far the best thing we've ever seen. It was absolutely amazing. It's groundbreaking, but I believe we can make it better. So we're not going to do it, and we're going to build it ourselves." And that's how we got Sky Digital Data,
Yes.
which is what I call the hybrid between a data layer and a tag, but not really a tag management
Yeah,
at the time
it wasn't a tag manager in any sense.
in any shape or form, but it was better than what we ever had at the time.
Yeah, I mean, no, it was an event-driven data layer. It was, it was pretty groundbreaking, but it was a data layer. It wasn't. I know that there were elements of collection and streaming the data out, but that wasn't a tag manager. That was very forward thinking, like streaming the data layer data out to an endpoint and processing it and using it for reporting. But it by no means was it a data layer. Sorry, it was
No,
a tag manager, because it didn't have a UI.
no, there was no UI. I was still fully reliant on them on doing everything, but it was just my realization that it was going to be almost impossible to get a true tag management in just because they valued having full control over the website than anything else at the time. And if you remember, it wasn't until near the end of my time at Sky that they finally agreed to bring in DTM.
Yes, I do remember that. Yeah, I think that was one of the first things I pushed for when I joined, wasn't it? It was basically you need to deploy the tag manager. I know you'd been pushing for it for ages, but I remember coming in and basically being told that there wasn't one and just being like,
Yeah. No, you finally got it pushed through when you became the manager for the implementation team.
oh god, yeah, I forgot it took that long.
Yeah.
Which was after you'd gone, of course.
It was after, so you started being it right before I was leaving, but that was already a year and a half into my
Yes.
owning the marketing cloud strategy.
Yes, you moved. Yeah, I remember that. It was a role change, wasn't it? And then you moved on. Oh man, that's great. I've completely forgotten about that. That we didn't even have a TMS initially. That's crazy.
Yeah, because I remember my first, because I'd already left the team, so I never had access to the DTMS guy. Was again for security reasons.
Yeah, you could have done anything.
Yeah.
We were well known for it.
But yeah, so that was my number two. It was just coming to realize that data layer was the future, even though I never got to really experience it at Sky.
It was yes, and I think we've now moved the data layer. I think the thing I liked about the Sky data layer is it was event driven. It was always event driven. I thought that was really forward thinking. It was none of this WC3 static object that gets overwritten. It was always, it was always forward thinking event driven data layer, which was good. So they were right.
But the very first version of it wasn't. It was still, you could call it event driven, but it was all functions. You called this function when this happened. So when this event happened, call this function, and then it does it.
There was still quite a lot of that when I was there as well. It was there was still a lot of functions that you could call, like hidden features and things you could get it to do. It was, and I guess that was where they thought that it was a tag manager because it had the functions in. But I mean, that's not the main thing about a tag manager is it's got a UI.
Not just that. I'm gonna go your favorite phrase. It's about the division of labor.
Yes, very much about that. It's about putting, because as I say, data quality is. I mean, to be fair, at Sky, data quality was one of the development team's responsibilities. I feel, but they had a million other responsibilities, and it's about putting the right job with the right team. Data quality should always have been our remit and our responsibility, and then you give that team the tools to manage that remit to the best of their ability.
Yep.
Division of labor, and then putting the weight of work in the place that has the most resource. So converting disparate web apps and different little bits and pieces into a coherent data layer is a lot of effort, but that's very much within the development team's remit because it's to do with the website and bringing our data together, and and then they have the numbers to do that, and it falls very nicely within the development team remit. Grabbing that data and mapping it to the various endpoints and actually saying what should be in the data layer in the first place, and defining that data layer and then monitoring that data layer to make sure that it does meet the business requirements is the role of us. Because we, as the conduit between the development team and the business in terms of what data needs to be collected.
So you're up for your number two.
I hope not. Anyway, sorry. I'm not even gonna follow that thought through to completion. I think the next big thing, I'm just reading them off because I've got the list in front of me, the ones I dropped in our Slack channel. I think the next really big change for me was GDPR. And preparing for that. Because you went from a space of we can collect everything to we can no longer collect everything, and moreover, we shouldn't be. we should be being extremely careful about what we collect. And it changed my mindset. It completely altered my mindset again. And I think it's this thing of because I did rail against it initially. I think it's safe to say when it was the early days, it hadn't come in yet because it. All right, I'm thinking back to like 2000 and what came in 2010, 11. I'm sure there was like a good few years of warnings before it came into force, but basically you had to start putting it in, and then it didn't actually. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. It didn't actually come into effect until 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 2018-ish where it started to really people started to take notice of it.
Well, 2016 was like, you've been warned. 2018, it actually came into effect, so you had to be done by then. And forgive me if I'm wrong. People can Google it, and we can put maybe a caption over the top to say Matt's wrong about that. But I do remember I do remember railing against it initially. Maybe this was some other piece of legislation because I'm thinking way back to the legal team at TD. So you're talking pre-2013. So maybe this was some other cookie-based decision. But
It was something else because GDPR, I think 2018 is when they were giving out warnings, and it wasn't until I want to say during COVID when they finally really started to enforce it. Because I remember that we never at Investec, we only got completed with the implementation of OneTrust just before I left.
right, okay. But the point still stands, and I think GDPR is probably the biggest example, but consent and privacy legislation, consent by design, privacy by design. And again, it's that journey, and it's always a journey. You hear about it initially and you go, this is crazy. We're not going to be able to collect our data anymore. What are they thinking? And then gradually you learn more about it and you go, actually, no, this makes sense. We need to be controlling this. And it's that change of mindset between where you were initially of wanting to collect everything to where we are now, and to be honest, where we've been for the last sort of 5 or 6 years, or longer, which is everything is compliance first, everything is consent first. The first question you ask when somebody wants a new tag, has this been approved by data governance? The first thing you ask when somebody wants to collect a hashed identifier, well, have you got approval for it? Is there a PIA in place? Just those things of, constantly questioning that, and you base a tag implementation on the consent platform. That is the core underpinning first number one thing. Before even your tag manager, before you've even decided if it's going to be GTM or Launch or Telium, before even you get to that point, it's like, well, what's the consent platform? What signals does it provide? What consent signals does it provide so that I can read this? When does it provide these signals? And then everything flows from there. Within reason, obviously, you've got to talk about your data layer and where the data is actually coming from, but fundamentally, can I even collect it? And to which vendors can I send this information? And that shift from let's collect things and then let's put a tag, let's put a consent management platform in place, to the entire thing is driven from the consent management platform, is I think a really major change, and that was one of the really big shifts in the whole industry. But for me, because I'm talking about it, for me, it's just that changing mindset. I went completely from one side of the spectrum. Oh, this is awful. We're going to lose our data. I'm now completely the other way around. I'm like, no, consent. It's like it's consent first. Everything has to be consent first.
Yeah. I mean, I remember those days where at least even I was considering, is this going to impact my job? Because if you can't have full trust in the data, who's going to hire you? And if you can't collect all the data, how can you have trust in it?
I think that was probably an overestimation of how much of the data and quality of the data we were collecting in the first place. But yeah, it's a fair point. But again, that change of mindset, it changes your it changes your view, because answer me this: at what point did you realize that behavioral digital analytics data was a trending tool and it wasn't a source of truth? Because it isn't. It isn't a source of truth. Like, let's just put it out there. It's a tool where you collect signals and you trend them over time to see how they change. It's not an order management system, for example.
Yeah. I'll admit, I was quite early on that because I always said that even back in 2010, 2012, that time period, I said that as long as we're within 5% of what the backend says, then we're fine. So I already knew it was never going to be 100%. And I always said, look, as long as we're trending in the right direction, we're fine. It probably wasn't until I really was pushing that until I would say 2015, 2016. And that's just because there was a lot more tools out there that was blocking analytics at the time.
Yeah. And it forces you into a realization, because one of two things is true. Either this is a version of truth and it's a record, in which case compliance and ad blockers and so on render the data useless, or it is a comparison tool that allows you to trend over time and look at things that have changed, and then overlay that with information that you know about what has changed, and to infer, performance. In which case, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're only collecting 50% of the data. You would like to collect more, but fundamentally, the core root of what the tool is for, a percentage of the data is okay. It's why GA samples the data.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm just conscious that you do want to have a hard stop in about 30 minutes, and we've done 2 each. So I'll keep this one nice and short. But with my next one is a shout out to the very first manager I ever had that focused on collection of data. So up until this point, I've always reported as someone who did the insight on digital data. But now I'm actually with someone who was responsible for the collection of data for offline for Sky. So his name was Alistair Smith. I'm going to give him a call just because he's still one of my favorite managers of all time. And he made me stop and think, not digital first. And one of the questions that he always would get to me to think about is, you need to start thinking about what does the end user want before they even know that they want it. And that was his way of trying to get me to think more like one of the directors, because I would always get frustrated whenever they come to me and say, I want to know about this. And they point me to that direction over there. But then whenever we get in the meeting and I'm ready to talk about over there, we're now talking about things over there.
The goalposts have moved.
The goalpost moved and I wasn't even aware that we're changing stadiums.
So, was the advice for the user, or was the advice for the business user when they were asking you for things like, in terms of what they want to know before they ask for it?
It was business users.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, and I think that is. I mean, it does resonate with me. It's not one of my. I've only got 4, by the way, so we're doing quite well, but I don't have 5. But that one does resonate with me, because it's something that I've always been keen on, which is, I don't want people to come to me with a ready-made solution. I want people to come to me with a question. I want to understand about this particular journey, or, this user journey, or I want to understand about this particular product. And then let us define how to collect the data to meet that need. And it's the same point, but viewed from a slightly different angle, which is, it's our job to tell you what you want to know, because otherwise we're a reporting function. We're an analyst. And analysis is we're looking and we're finding things and we're telling you. And data collection for the purposes of analysis is just one step up the funnel from that. Is we're telling you that this is the data that you will need to answer this question that you want to answer. So yes, I think that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you're saying, I much prefer people come to me with here's the business question I'm trying to answer. Because if you bring me your solution, it's kind of like saying, you know what, you give me a box from IKEA to build a coffee table. Don't complain to me whenever I build it and you actually realize, no, you needed an actual dining room table.
The example that I always remember, and I won't say where it was, but it formed within me an abiding hatred of rotating carousels on websites. I don't hate like roundabouts and little things at theme parks, but like rotating carousels
Yeah.
on websites. Um, and it was a team who had implemented a rotating carousel on a website, and we saw a huge spike in the analytics data. And obviously, this was Adobe. You were charged for the number of hits, and I went to ask them. I said, "What you need? Firstly, you need to turn that off because you're going to burn through our budget, like our yearly budget, in a month. And secondly, why? Why have you built this? Like, was it some sort of horrible error? What are you doing?" And they said, "No, all we've done is we've built this carousel, and every time it spins round, um, we track that it was viewable, and then we track when someone's clicked on it. So basically, if someone just leaves this carousel up, and this was a website with hundreds of millions of hits, if someone just leaves this website running, it's just going to keep collecting, keep collecting, keep collecting." And like, we're trying to answer the question as to which of these carousel creatives will generate the most click-throughs. And I said, what you've described there is an A/B test. Rather than building a carousel, what you should have done is speak to the testing team, the Adobe Target team, and ask them to create a variant with each of the images that you wanted. And then they would have created that variant, and then you could have measured click-through rate. Because the only question that you're going to answer is which element appeared in the carousel first, because that's what people are going to click on. People don't sit on a website site and watch carousel spin out for 5 minutes with like a 10-second delay between images showing. Just whichever one you present first is the one that's going to get clicked. So all you're answering is a question is the answer to a question that you already knew, which is which image did we put first? Oh, okay. Yeah, a very good example of that exact problem.
Yeah. I've seen that one too many times. And I almost wish we could have like a policy, no more carousels on websites.
I agree. And they're utterly pointless because whatever you pull first, is the one that gets clicked.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
All right. So what's your number 3?
My number 3, we're getting towards the present day now. My number 3 is server side. I don't think that the adoption rate. I don't think it's the seismic shift that everyone originally pitched it as per se, because adoption rates they're a lot better than they used to be. But I mean, we've had server side for a while now, and adoption rates are still kind of thereabouts. We're still migrating people to server side. So firstly, I like it for that because it gives me stuff to do, and I can migrate people to server side. So we've as you know, we're in the middle of migrating a client, 109 websites to server side. That's good fun, figuring out how to do that.
At scale.
It's at scale. It is at scale.
Mhm.
Which funnily enough feeds into my final one. But the the thing that I think is the fundamental shift in with server side for me is what I've had to learn in order to do it. Because up until picking up server side implementations, I haven't really had to learn that much about cloud infrastructure, cloud architecture, GCP, Azure. And I think what's interesting with server side is I've always been, probably up until 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I've always been client side. It's always been client side JavaScript. It's always been creating scripts and running those scripts in the browser. And the browser is where I operated, and the mobile app as well. But for the purpose, let's talk about the browser. What server side brings in is having to get under the skin of, here's what happens to the data when it lands in the cloud. Here's how you route it through. You have to understand about like security certificates and load balancers. Fundamentally, I think the thing that all of mine are all learning experiences. This is where I've had an opportunity to learn something new. And there's two things that come out of it. One is you have to learn the tooling. You have to learn about cloud. You have to learn about that world and the way that world works. But the other thing that you have to get used to is working with tooling that isn't necessarily under your control. Like when I talk about the tag manager is my thief. It's my remit. It's my space, and I own the tag manager. That's what I do for those browser level JavaScript implementations. When we start to talk about server side and we start to talk about cloud environments, you're interacting with whole new teams. So I had to learn how to speak to development teams, largely front end development teams. Now I'm having to talk to DNS teams that set up the domains and manage the domains. I'm having to talk to cloud engineering teams. I'm having to talk to data architecture teams, because obviously security has to be in place on everything that we set up. And I'm working within an infrastructure. I don't own GCP. When none of the clients that we're working for are going to give me full ownership of GCP, whereas they will give us full ownership of Adobe Launch. They will give us full ownership of GTM. It won't give us full ownership of the cloud, because there's so many other things that the cloud's doing, not just running server-side GTM. That's one tiny element of what it's doing. It's a data repository. It's a data science space and all the rest of it. And so bringing that in and looking at that and working with that within that environment has brought me into contact with all of these different teams, which has been fantastic as a learning experience, and learning how to speak to them and frame things in a way that they understand. It's forced me to learn about cloud architecture and how these platforms actually work. And then that kind of led me on little side projects. So just as part of that, like when I was learning JavaScript as part of Code Academy, as part of trying to learn about cloud architecture, I figured out that, okay, well, why don't I just try and host a WordPress site on GCP? Right, I did that. How about I create a load balancer for my site? And so the data coming into my site hits the load balancer. And if it's this type of request, it retrieves the website. And if it's this type of request, it retrieves the G tag, so to load analytics on my site. So it's just learning all of those things. I think, yeah. And then we fed that into the team, so that the team is starting to pick up on these cloud engineering things. And it's like, okay, I've created a function that can retrieve information from this endpoint, but I'm running it on my machine. You go take that and put that in the cloud so that it's now enterprise level. Anyone can leverage it. And then the other thing that the server side shift has forced me to do is to learn like Node.js and Python. More Node.js because I'm a JavaScript guy. But to learn these little self-contained libraries that I can run on my machine and start to lean into automation. And essentially all of that originally stemmed from server-side tag management coming along and realizing that I needed to get on board with it and needed to understand it. So I think that's been a relatively recent and very fundamental shift in the way that I work, and it's led on to all of these different avenues that have come off the back of it.
No, I know how much time you spent on doing this, and I know coming down the line, it will come my way, and I'm going to need to go through the exact same learning that you have already done.
Well, hopefully I can help with a bit of that, because it's because we've got a few of the other guys on the team who are leading into it, and I think it's definitely something where we need to focus on a bit of knowledge transfer and make sure that everyone's got it, because it really helps with just like understanding the end-to-end processes.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the server side technology. It's more of how do you do it from scratch?
Yes, exactly. Which
Mm.
which will undoubtedly, when when we talk about it and when we go through it, will undoubtedly lead to. I think this is the thing: is it's happy coincidence, but you start on one thing and then your brain kind of veers off onto these other things, and you end up in all these different avenues. Um, so hopefully, as we do the knowledge transfer into you around this, something new will come to your mind, and we'll end up with a thing that I never considered. And that's the thing about knowledge transfer and spreading these things around, is you people don't develop in the same exact path that you developed. People do things in a different way, and you end up with these wonderful different, um, I guess, different service lines almost.
All right. Well, I'll go to my number 4, and then my number 5 and your number 4 are probably going to line up finally. But for me, it was finally we're in tag management solutions category. And the thing that will stick to me on this one was DTM was great, but the transition from DTM to Adobe Launch was groundbreaking in my mind still, because you had fully now more control over when and how things were being triggered. And I will always just remember it was unfortunately during COVID where I was doing the migration for Investec from DTM to Adobe Launch. And I told myself I'm going to get this complete migration done in 2 weeks. Now that's 2 weeks only on myself. I had no one else to be able to do the work for this. And I was getting up at start work at 8 o'clock, finish work at midnight, and I did it for 2 weeks straight through weekends because I told myself by that point I'm going to have it done. And the reason I say this is made me change the way of thinking is before it was run the set code, it went. Run this set code, it went. This is the first time where you have more of a building block where it was, we'll run this, then this, then this, then this, and this, and this, and now it's finally done. Now go. And having control over how you connect all these dots together to make it run.
I really enjoy that, because that was exactly my experience with it. The light bulb moment with me, and I think this was Sky. I was migrating Sky from DTN to Launch. Um, the light bulb moment with me was particularly with the event-driven data layer that Sky had. Was, hang on a minute, I don't need all of the data to be available at the time that my event happens. What I can do is I can take this event, and if the second set of data that I need to send doesn't exist, I can wait for that to come along. I can merge those two pieces of data together, because in Launch I have this, like you said, this Lego block approach. I can build it together, and then I can send it once I've got the full data set. And I think what's interesting now is the more that I then got to grips with GTM, I realized that GTM was always that. So, I'd been in a company, and this is the thing about working client side rather than agency side. Um, I've been in a company that was just put the code on the website, then it was DTM. Then I went to Sky, and then we got DTM implemented, then it was Launch. And it was like, oh, brilliant, this is event driven, and we can do this building block approach. Then got more and more involved with Google Tag Manager, and as I got more and more involved with Google Tag Manager, it has its limitations, but you kind of realize, yeah, I get that it's always been like that. That's what GTM is. It's this event-driven tool, and you can do that. It's got its internal data layer, so you can just push stuff onto the internal data model that GTM runs, and then push the data out. That's always been how GTM functions. Whereas with Launch, that you almost have to create your own data model and then push things onto it in an event-driven way, and then collect it. Whereas GTM is like it's built in. So what we tended to do by that modular approach, by that Lego block approach, was make Launch more like GTM.
I wouldn't say that we make Adobe Launch more like GTM. I would say we get Adobe Launch to share some of the qualities of GTM, but I find that we make it better.
I like Launch is more flexible. I do like, and this isn't a Launch versus GTM thing, but I do like that within Launch there's the event object, and you can directly go and edit the event object yourself. Whereas in GTM, it's like, no, you can't do that. There is an event, this is what the data was when that event fired, and then if you try to go and augment that data, so if you try and fire something off the back of that event, and then you try and change the data model before the event then sends, so you say, here, the event happens, I'm going to monkey around with the internal data model, now I'm going to send it, like, it doesn't like that at all. So with GTM, you almost have to say, if I want to alter the data model, I need to fire the first event, alter the data model, trigger a new data layer event, and then do the collect on the second one. So it is a bit more restricting in that way. Although I think there's a lot to be said for that because it's a lot less dangerous. But yes, Launch does give you more options to augment and change and enrich.
Yeah, and there is a future podcast that's going to be just me, where I'm going to talk about things I like and don't like about GTM and Adobe Launch, and there things that I ran into the last several days about GTM that I do not like. Just really hammer more into why I do not like this one aspect of it. But I'll save that for a future podcast. You get a glimpse of what it could be on my 0.5 and your 0.4.
Well, maybe we do like a sort of grudge match, Launch versus GTM. I mean, I like them both, but I do have a lot of time for GTM. So maybe we do like a grudge match where we profess our love for our preferred tag management solution.
And our hate for the one. It's one of the things. I don't have a love or hate either one. It's just there's things about it.
No, fair enough.
Yeah. So would you like to go ahead and kick off what changed our careers the most?
Yes, and it's the most recent one, and it kind of follows on from the server side thing. It's AI, and more accurately, it's AI and automation. So I mentioned that off the back of like server side and getting to grips with cloud engineering and so on, and having to kind of learn a bit more around Python and Node.js and these self-contained libraries. One of the things that came out of the back of that was automation. This was before the whole AI thing went crazy, and we're only talking in the last year or so, really. There was the people were talking about AI for a couple of years, but it wasn't. I wasn't sitting there talking to Claude all day. It was still making its way into the industry. It wasn't quite as central as it is now. And at that time, we were dealing with large enterprise clients, hundreds of websites across the world, like globally, and we came to the conclusion that the way that you do that and the way that you do implementations consistently, if you need to do the same thing over and over and over again, it speaks to itself. It's an automation script. That's what you want. And GTM in particular, and Launch, to be fair, but this was GTM. But GTM is API driven, or it can be API driven. You can do everything virtually, like not quite everything, but you can't publish to a development environment, for example. You can only publish to live, but basically you can do everything in GTM via the API. So
Same thing with Adobe Launch. Everything's API.
Absolutely, no, by no means. But the realization, and the thing that has fundamentally shifted my way of working, was firstly, and it came out to the server side thing, the realization that we can automate this. We don't need to manually go into every container, and more to the point, if we automated, it would be more accurate than if we tried to go into each individual container and just go click, 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 done, click, 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 done. This will do a better job because there'll be no human error. if it's wrong and it breaks, we can fix it almost instantly because all we do is update the script, push send, and then it goes again and it fixes it. So we're not having to go back to the start and do click, click, deploy. And so that was a huge realization that came almost by necessity because we had a thing that we'd been contracted to do. We knew that we needed to do it because it was part of the proposal, but it was a very fundamental shift. It's just, let's just automate this. Of course, why wouldn't you? And then AI came into the mix. And what happened then is the speed at which you could then generate an automation script. You still need to validate it. You still need to check it and make sure that it's definitely doing the thing that it's meant to do. But the speed at which you can generate an automation script, particularly if you've got previous examples of something you've built and works, and you give it and say, like you're in VS Code, and you copy the API calls across and a few of the functions, and you say, this worked before. I know it worked before because I ran it. Now I want to do this thing. Take what I've built and repurpose it for the new task. The speed at which you can automate at scale by using Claude Code, for example, in VS Code. Now, my preference is to use it as like the chat widget. So I'm not too bothered about using Claude Code in the terminal because I like to run the Node.js scripts that I generate, the automated scripts in the terminal. So I have Claude Code sat in plan mode basically, and I talk to it in plan mode, and then it generates the plan, and then we execute the plan. And then I review it, of course, and validate that everything that it's supposed to do is what it's supposed to be doing. But the speed at which you can generate those automations now is frightening. So I, as a single person in a day, can do something that would have taken a team of 5 people weeks. And I think the challenge now is the pricing model. It's like this was like an Accenture bringing on lots and lots of individual, individual people to go at this in the traditional way of just going manually and use the UI. How much would that cost? Versus I can do it faster, I can do it more accurately. So that has been a huge, huge, huge shift. And it's been relatively recent because only recently is I'm not going to say only recently is the AI been in a position to do it. I guess it's been in that position for a long time, but only recently have I absorbed that. And again, it kind of stems from that server-side GTM thing and that server-side implementation thing. Learning about all of these different things and going off on those tangents has then led to that light bulb moment of, let's automate this stuff, and then let's get the AI to build the automation scripts for us. I work more in VS Code now than I do in the Tag Manager interface, and I work more with like Claude Code and VS Code, and then with the AI agent open. I'm not quite in the place because of the clients and because of the scale where I'm opening it out to an MCP. I am the layer between the AI and the execution. I'm doing the execution. I'm checking the script. I'm making sure that it's right. I'm pushing it to a certain point, making sure it goes no further, making sure that we run the validation manually. There's still a manual element because you don't want this to go wrong. So I'm not quite on board with, I've got the MCP, I give it all the access, I press the button and it goes and does it. Like I'm not there, but I think there is an argument for that, but not at the scale that we're wanting to do. And also, I think, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent again, and we've only got like 3 minutes, but there's also a cost element. If you can automate something and you can use the AI agent to create the automation, you're going to burn through a lot less tokens than you are just like telling the AI agent go ahead and do it via an MCP. That's going to absolutely rinse your usage tokens on whatever AI agent you use. So it's a cheaper way of doing it, and it's more effective because it's less likely to cock it up. But yeah, that has been huge, huge change.
Well, hopefully you can say a little bit later, but just for me, it's the same thing. It's AI, and there's only three main things I want to touch on this. Most of it you've already touched on, but from my perspective, one is the fact that we can do things much faster. Now, how I look at AI, it's kind of like carpentry. We always had the hammer and nail, and that's how we did things. Now that AI came along, it's kind of like we got the nail gun. It's not going to replace the carpenter, but it's going to make the carpenter more effective to be able to build things faster. So the first thing was we had a Excel sheet that said, here's our tagging implementation, and they wanted a data schema. We have lots of experience of building this and lots of things that you can model off of. I created a nice little model to say, here's everything. Here's their implementation. Create me a schema. Did it create it correctly the first time? No. But it got me 90% there. So something that used to take me weeks to build, I could do in a day.
Absolutely, and I think it then, and I mentioned it before, but then the problem becomes the pricing model. Because to your example, the carpenter who gets the nail gun and can now build the cabinet faster, or the table or whatever, gets paid per cabinet, gets paid per table. Consultancy, by and large, gets paid by the hour. And so how do you square that circle? And we can do a whole other podcast about that perhaps, but about how we're trying to do that. But it's a problem because we're delivering better quality work faster at a much larger scale. But how do you make sure that generates margin? Anyway, sorry. But
No problem. Second one is automating tasks. Now, I'm not going anywhere near the automation that you are yet, but example of something we did today. It was in Adobe Launch, we needed to do an extension upgrade. So, as you know, you would create a copy of your property, do the upgrade, you test it there, you run it on that one, you run it on your existing one, you then check line by line that everything is coming through the data as you expect. Now, that would take us about 4 hours, maybe 5. But using the AI, I did a 30-minute meeting. I copied the property, I built it, I ran a specific journey, downloaded the calls I needed from that, did it again, the exact same journey but with the old one, downloaded that, put in the AI to compare these two, and it created me a sheet showing me that they were essentially identical. Now that's more accurate and it's faster.
definitely.
Yep. And then the last one is we can learn, has to learn much faster. So I am constantly just pushing things through it. And something which I wanted to do, I'm really big on QA and making sure that everything is working correctly. And it's really nice that I can see the pixels going off and doing that testing. But I want to know about the data layer as well. I want to check it with the schema. I want to check it against everything else that's coming through. So I actually created a extension using AI, and it's constantly scraping all this information off. So especially with those who are using Adobe Launch, I can nearly pull off about 5 or 6 different things from their implementation automatically. Because if I was to say what's the one thing that is the most annoying about Adobe Launch when you're trying to see what tags are firing, it's the fact that you have to constantly tell it, put it in debug mode, constantly put it in debug mode. My extension does it by automatically. I don't have to worry. I just tell it turn on, puts it in debug mode, and now it also captures everything that is being, all the tags being fired. And now I can download a CSV or a JSON and pump that into the AI as well. So imagine now having all of the pixels being fired, but also all the tags being fired. Now you can compare on those at that scale, and it's even more powerful.
No, I completely agree. I mean, one of the things that I've been using it for is just little research projects, self-contained research projects, and depth the depth of the level of output that you can get and the time that it takes to achieve that output is mind-blowing. And I'm thinking that I'm gonna turn it into a skill so that it's the same every time, because the questions that you ask are basically the same. Like, um, what tags fire before consent? Number one. What tags fire after consent, and does the consent management platform have visibility of them? Is Google Ad Manager present? If it's present, what do the viewability figures look like? What might be impacting viewability? Just things like that, where it's all just technical stuff, but you can just feed in half files. You do the analysis. You know what to look for. You know what to tell it. You say, look, this is the thing that I'm interested in, and it gets it wrong. And then you challenge it, and you say, I don't think you're quite right on that. I think it's this, and you give it some more context. But fundamentally, the speed at which you can get to those answers, and the depth of the technical knowledge that you can get, because Claude's got a browser plugin. So you run the website and you say, look, I'm interested to know about the GAM implementation and viewability, and here's the things I know already. Go run it, and then it'll reload the page. Basically, you get, and look at the HAR files and look at the network request. Yeah, it's a game changer for analytics implementation, for automation, for generating automations, but then also just for research and audits. That introductory thing that you have with the client, where you're talking to them possibly for the second or third time, and you're saying, here's what we found. Here's the things that you can fix.
Yep. Yeah, and the way I look at AI is not about replacing anyone, at least at Loop Horizon right now. It's about getting the most out of them. So a team of 5 can now easily output the same as a team of 10.
Oh yeah, probably more.
Yeah.
In some of the tasks, like some of those automation tasks where we're rolling things out across like 100 websites or whatever, it's probably a team of 1, like a single person is delivering what a team of 10 or 20 would deliver.
Yeah. But that is going to be another podcast for another day, because I know that was something I've had a lot of conversations on with people who are more junior. I'm like, how is this going to impact them? Or people who are just about to be going into university, how is this AI going to be impacting their ability to get a job when they finish university?
Well, it's interesting, and I know that we're over time, but
Yeah.
I worry, and maybe reality will never pan out like the way that you predict, but I worry that we're in a very privileged position because we've had to do the legwork, we've had to do the learning, we've had to do all of this build, all of this JavaScript, all of this stuff without the help of AI. All we could do was, and we've been privileged to a degree. We've been able to do a Google search, we've been able to find things, but we've had to synthesize and generate all of these things ourselves, and we've had 15 years at it before AI came around. So we're in a very privileged position of being senior, very experienced experts in this field, and it will be the case for anyone in any very specialized field. It's going to be interesting to see, like, the younger people coming through. How are they going to get that experience?
Exactly. And that's the podcast I want to do later on. Don't know when, but we'll figure it out. I know we are running out of time.
We have
So, the only thing I wanted to leave was, while I don't have a PowerPoint up right now, I am going to be putting up a QR code where you can access a Microsoft form where you can leave some feedback, ask a question that we could answer on a future podcast. So, something new that I want to try to do to try to get more engagement with the audience to have a direct access to us. So I'm not going to say that we'll respond back always, but you know what? At least we'll have the ability to read off many of these on a future podcast.
No, thank you for doing that.
Yep. But I think that we should go ahead and wrap it up. So, Matt, it's been absolutely great talking about this and just seeing. Well, we had several that were exactly aligned. We just had it positioned in a different spot.
No, it's been really good. Good to run through our careers in a way.
Great to reminisce about it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.